which are now taking. Well, also tonight, we are going in depth on something a lot of Bay Area communities are talking about. It's prompting difficult conversations and, quite frankly, a lot of tears. And it's reached a new stage. We're talking about fentanyl overdoses, which are now taking the lives of teenagers and children. Dealers are lacing drugs with fentanyl. What you see is not necessarily what you get. A quick explainer here. Fentanyl is a cheap and potent opioid that can help increase profits for those drug dealers by adding fentanyl to drugs like cocaine or pills. For the past 5 months, our investigative unit has been digging into this problem. In our reporting, we focus on a troubling death in Santa Cruz. This is 16-year-old Lace Price, who suddenly lost her life. She was found dead in a Santa Cruz County home last November. The man connected to the home now being charged with providing her drugs, but he's not being charged with her death. And that's raising questions about how some law enforcement respond to possible fentanyl calls. Lace's parents, along with an expert we spoke with, say deputies missed their chance to gather valuable evidence. They say at the time of Lace's death, they didn't treat the house as a possible crime scene.
I asked the officer, I said, if a minor was in my home today and I called you and said they were dead on the floor, would my house be considered a crime scene? And he said, yes, it would. And I said, you failed. And he said, I know.
Why is this all happening and what can be done? We're joined tonight by investigative reporter Candace Wynn, who's leading our coverage on the story, and by retired police detective Michael Leninger. Nice to have both of you on the program. Candace, let's start with you. Strong words there from Lace Price's parents. What's the response from the sheriff's office in Santa Cruz County?
Well, the Santa Cruz County Sheriff refused to answer any of my specific questions by call, by email, even when we stopped by his headquarters personally. I want to ask him, did his deputies treat that house as a potential crime scene? When the call came in, about an hour later, they called the coroner's office. Why was that? And when the initial call came in, it was also reported that Lace Price was 20 years old. Did investigators right away check her age to find that she was in fact 16 years old? These are important questions, Raj, that we have not gotten any answers to after asking them repeatedly.
And Michael, that's why we have you to get some answers from the law enforcement background here. What does it matter now how police treat a drug death call or like a medical call instead of a crime scene? What's the difference?
The difference is a medical call is just that. Paramedics are getting handled it. The person's going to be transported to the hospital. Drug death or a suspected drug death is definitely a suspicious death at minimum. It should be treated as such. It should be a crime scene. The scene should be frozen. You'd be looking at multiple interviews, identifying everyone at the scene. And if it's a drug death, you're going to be looking for drug paraphernalia, drugs. This clearly was a missed opportunity, and even more so, was still someone peddling fentanyl-laced drugs out there on the street after this, and that simply equates to the possibility of more deaths.
And Michael, are we missing the boat here? Are the police departments and county sheriffs missing the memo of what's happening, or are they starting to change their strategy in terms of police and prosecution?
The folks that I spoke with are changing their policies, and you're finding with some departments that they're actually sending narco officers out to these scenes now because they understand the necessity to get out there and try to identify the dealer and to stop that particular dealer with those particular drugs. In this particular instance, that opportunity was completely subjugated, and 4 weeks later, evidence is destroyed, witnesses are gone. The girl was 16 years old, and no one even bothered to identify her at the scene.
Candace, in my community just a couple of weeks ago, there was a teenage girl that died of an apparent fentanyl overdose now. This is such a concern for parents.
It is. I think the one thing we're learning is this fentanyl opioid overdose is not just targeting adults and people with a history of drug abuse. Young teens are being advertised to as well. I've talked to
years old, and no one even bothered to identify her at the scene.
Candace, in my community just a couple of weeks ago, there was a teenage girl that died of an apparent fentanyl overdose now. This is such a concern for parents.
It is. I think the one thing we're learning is this fentanyl opioid overdose is not just targeting adults and people with a history of drug abuse. Young teens are being advertised to as well. I've talked to prosecutors, with therapists who say kids are getting access to these drugs and powders online and social media, unaware that these drugs contain or may contain fentanyl. As you mentioned, in Los Altos, the high school there just lost a student, and police from the very beginning said that they believe that fentanyl was involved. Just in January, Santa Clara County's DA filed a murder charge after they say a 12-year-old girl from San Jose passed away after consuming less than a single pill laced with fentanyl. Very, very sad.
Michael, what should parents know about this crisis? How do we talk to our kids here?
You know, it's the narrative has changed. It really has to go something like, you simply do not know what you're taking. You don't know what you're putting in your body. And fentanyl has become so prominent and it's so deadly, and there is no way of detecting that. You know, please do not do this. If you see somebody else doing it, you know, ask them to stop as well. But it's very important for our children to understand that this is no longer any of this crying wolf. It's not the drugs are bad narrative whatsoever. This is a fact that kids will more than likely check this out on the internet, and they should validate it for themselves. But the odds of getting fentanyl-laced drugs are becoming higher and higher literally every day. San Jose is one of the 2 hubs in California for fentanyl delivery from Mexico.
Terrifying to hear all this. Candace, final question to you. You surprised, or were you surprised by anything that you learned throughout your investigation?
I was surprised by a lot of things. Absolutely. I was surprised how differently counties are fighting fentanyl, even though this crisis is in some way or another everywhere, and in some counties really seeing surges. And I was also surprised by warnings that we learned that law enforcement received about the suspect, the defendant in this case, just weeks before this girl passed away. So that wasn't in the investigation you guys all just watched a short time ago, but that's in part 2 in our next report.
All very good reporting. Candace Wynn, thank you so much. Michael Leninger, appreciate your time as well. We devoted an entire section of our website to this fentanyl crisis and its impacts. Head to NBCBayArea.com/fighting fentanyl. You can watch Candace's full investigation, as well as read about the resources that are available right now to help.